Hello and welcome. We are back with more notable names in African American history. Before we get into the video, I just want to remind you I've got two ways to donate. I have a Ko-fi account and a Patreon account, both of which will be listed in the description box below the video. Ko-fi account allows you to make smaller one-time donations, and the Patreon is more of a month-to-month thing. So, however, don't donate if you can't afford it. I want you to be able to pay what you need to pay first. Please. Life is tough enough for everybody out there right now. And you don't need to be putting yourself in the straits just because you may think it'd be great to donate. If you can, and it won't hurt you financially, then I do appreciate a donation. With that, let's jump back into the video. Today, we are looking at a Dorie Miller. He is a noted gentleman during World War II of great distinction for what he did. It took a lot. Just, you can imagine with all going on. And remember, during World War II, America still had a very segregated military. It would be integrated after World War II, but still segregated during World War II. I hate all the racism that is so prevalent in this nation. But anyway. Doris Miller stood for everything that is good about our nation, and his story continues to be remembered and repeated wherever our people continue to the watch today. This is from the National Museum of the Pacific War, notably the part of the World War II that was with Japan. Doris Miller was born to Connery and Henrietta Miller, sharecroppers in Waco, Texas, on October the 12th, 1919. He had to drop out of school to help support his family, working as a cook to supplement the family income during the Great Depression, which, remember, is 1929 throughout the 30s. In 1939, just before his 20th birthday, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, and after training in Norfolk, Virginia, became a mess attendant, one of the few positions open to African Americans in the Navy. And all that just means is he was an attendant in the kitchen. He dealt with the food. He was assigned to the USS West Virginia, which soon left to join the rest of the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. You can see where this is going, in response to increasing Japanese aggression. Prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, African American roles in the Navy were limited to messmen and general service. Segregation was still deeply ingrained into the military structure, and many of the leading military and political figures believed that not only would any white serviceman refuse to serve under a black man, but that they truly thought that such areas of authority were beyond the capabilities of any person of color. Just stupidity. on the part of so many people based on the racism that was embedded into the history of the nation. There was some discussion of finding other areas of service for blacks in the Navy, but very little came of it until December of 1941. Yep, December the 7th, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. On Sunday, the 7th of December, 1941, Mass Attendant 3rd Class Doris Miller was retrieving laundry when the Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. He arrived on deck, where he encountered his mortally wounded commanding officer and carried him to safety. He proceeded to one of the machine guns, and although black sailors never received training on the anti-aircraft guns, he opened fire on the Japanese planes overhead. After the gun ran out of ammunition, Miller assisted in evacuating sailors after the order to abandon ship and was one of the last 3 men to leave the vessel as it sank. Even after leaving the ship, he still helped numerous sailors to safety. His heroic actions stirred the nation, but he was not formally identified or recognized for his role in saving lives at Pearl Harbor for a few months. Accounts circulated about an unnamed black sailor who had manned a machine gun despite never firing a gun before, but it wasn't until March 1942 that the Pittsburgh Courier identified the sailor as Doris Miller. Still, debates in political spheres stalled any formal recognition or award for Miller's actions. In May of 1942, Miller was presented with the Navy Cross by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet and Pacific Ocean areas, making Miller the first black sailor to receive such an honor. His image was used for recruitment posters, and he was even recalled to the U.S. for a war bonds tour before returning to active service in the Pacific. He continued to serve in the Navy as a mess attendant until the 24th of November, 1942, when his carrier, the USS Linscomb Bay, was hit by a torpedo during the Gilbert Islands campaign, and its bomb magazine exploded and most of the crew were killed. Miller was presumed dead, although his body was never recovered. He was declared killed in action after a year. He was 24 years of age. Mess Attendant First Class Doris Miller left behind a legacy that impacted generations to come. His actions during the attack on Pearl Harbor alone saved numerous lives, risking his own to ensure the safety of sailors escaping sinking ships and perilous waters and Japanese fire. In April 1942, even before Miller was officially awarded the Navy Cross for his deeds, Secretary of the Navy William Franklin Knox announced the opening of an all-black naval training base in Illinois, ceding to the call for increased equal rights among black recruits. Miller's presence and talks during his 1942-43 War Bonds tour incited a tremendous reaction and inspired new sailors, particularly African Americans, to take advantage of their opportunities and serve their country for the freedom of all. There's an image from the tour. Above and beyond the call of duty, Doris Miller, known as Dorie. In 1944, the Navy initiated a black officers training program. Black sailors were previously only allowed to enlist, and produced its first black officers in March of 1944. Although Miller's actions and service did not immediately break down the barriers in racial segregation within the U.S. military, it certainly paved the way for new steps to be taken towards equality, and along with the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s eventually led to the desegregation in the military. The U.S. christened the destroyer escort USS Miller in June of 1973, and in 2020 the U.S. Navy announced its intention to name the future Ford-class aircraft carrier after Doris Miller. The USS Doris Miller, the first to be named for an enlisted sailor, is expected to be delivered to the Navy in 2032. Former Acting Secretary of Navy Thomas B. Maudley summarized, "Doris Miller stood for everything that is good about our nation, and his story continues to be remembered and repeated wherever our people continue the watch today. His legacy survives today and reminds us of service and heroism in the face of prejudice and hardship, and that the fight for freedom is freedom for all." So yeah, that's from the National Museum of the Pacific War. Let's hop over here to the Naval History and Heritage Command. Third class Dorie Miller. There he is receiving the Navy Cross from Admiral Nimitz, the highest award the Navy could bestow. He was actually nominated for the Medal of Honor, but the Secretary of Navy, who is known, was kind of a racist shit, recommended against it. And so he never did get a Medal of Honor, but he was nominated for it. Doris Dorie Miller was born in Waco, Texas on the 12th of October, 1919. We talked about that. Enlisted in the Navy on the USS West Virginia during Pearl Harbor. Awarded Navy Cross for his actions. He served aboard the USS Indianapolis from December of 1941 until May of 1943, and then was assigned to the escort carrier, the Liscum Bay, the one he unfortunately would pass away while he was aboard. Yeah. But we got some images of that moment of Doris Miller's life here. Talking with 3 other sailors and a civilian during his visit to the Naval Training Station in Great Lakes, Illinois, the one that was opened up while he was still serving. He, Miller here, is wearing the Navy Cross Medal awarded for heroism during the attack, the Pearl Harbor attack. Speaking during a visit with the Naval Training Station that they open up in Great Lakes, Illinois. Again, he's pictured wearing his Navy Cross medal. There's the image they would use for the war bonds and everything. But yeah, mess attendant second class Doris Miller, after just being presented with the Navy Cross by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz on board the USS Enterprise at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Nimitz, in this image right here, awards the Navy Cross to Doris Miller for heroism aboard the USS West Virginia. And then Black History poster featuring Navy Cross awardee Doris Miller and the ship named in his honor, the USS Miller. The original artwork was created circa 1976 by William M. Moser of the Navy Recruiting Command. But yeah, that's what they have from the Naval History and Heritage Command. Let's jump over here to Britannica. Born Waco, Texas, died Gilbert Islands off the Budaratari Atoll. Talked about him working on his family's farm, played football in high school, and enlisted in the U.S. Navy in '39. Was the mess attendant stationed at Pearl Harbor when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. Doing laundry below decks on the USS West Virginia, and when the alarm called the ship's crew to battle stations, Miller headed a gun magazine amidships. A torpedo had damaged the magazine, so the physically strong Miller began carrying the wounded to safety. Among those he attended was to the ship's commander, Captain Mervyn Binion, who was mortally wounded. Miller then manned a .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun for which he had no training, and continued firing on the enemy until he ran out of ammunition and was ordered to abandon ship. His actions during the attack earned him a commendation from the Secretary of Navy Frank Knox and the Navy Cross, which was presented to him by Admiral Nimitz. Unfortunately, he would pass away in 1943 when a torpedo sank the ship he was on, the carrier Linscomb Bay. But yeah. Now let's head on over to Wikipedia over here, take a further look. Miller received the Navy Cross from Admiral Nimitz, but many sailors and naval officers believed Miller's heroism deserved a Medal of Honor. He was actually nominated for a Medal of Honor by a congressman from Michigan and a senator from New York. And the black press enthusiastically campaigned for Miller to receive this decoration. Secretary of Navy Frank Knox, who opposed black sailors serving in the U.S. in any combat role, recommended against Miller receiving the Medal of Honor. So yeah, like I said, Secretary of Navy kind of put the kibosh on it, but he's like, he's worthy of a Navy Cross, I guess. It's like, dude, no black sailor, soldier, or Marine was awarded the Medal of Honor between 1941 and 1945, and it wouldn't be until 1996 Vernon J. Baker was the only black veteran of World War II to be awarded a Medal of Honor while still alive. In June 1943, Miller was promoted to cook petty officer, third class. And in November, he would be killed aboard the Linscomb Bay, one of 702 officers and sailors. The deadliest sinking of a carrier in the history of the U.S. Navy. So, yeah. Born to Connery and Henrietta Miller. He was named Doris as the midwife who assisted his mother was convinced before the birth that the baby would be a girl. He was the third of 4 sons and helped around the house, cooked meals, and did laundry, as well as worked on the family farm. Played fullback for the school football team at Waco's Alexander James Moore High School. When he began to attend the 8th grade at age 17. He repeated the grade the following year because of poor performance, so he decided to drop out of school. He was filled his time with squirrel hunting with a .22 rifle and completed a correspondence course in taxidermy. Applied to join the Civilian Conservation Corps, but was not accepted. At the time, he was 6'3" and weighed more than 200 pounds. Miller worked on his father's farm until shortly before his 20th birthday. The nickname Dorie may have originated from a typographical error. He was nominated for recognition of his actions from Pearl Harbor, and the Pittsburgh Courier released the story on March 14, 1942, which actually recognized him as Dorie Miller. Because remember, up to that point, they didn't even know who it was. It was just known as an unnamed black man. Listed in the U.S. Navy as a mess attendant, third class, in Dallas, Texas for 6 years. We know he was in Norfolk, so transferred, to the Naval Training Center, Naval Operating Base, Norfolk, Virginia, arriving September 19th. After that, he was assigned to the ammunition ship Pyro, an AE-1, and then transferred on January the 2nd, 1940, to the Colorado-class battleship, the USS West Virginia. It was on the West Virginia where he started actually competition boxing, becoming the ship's heavyweight champ. Interesting, okay. In July, he was on temporary duty aboard the Nevada at Secondary Battery Gunnery School. He returned to the West Virginia on August the 3rd and was advanced in rating to mess attendant second class February 16th, 1941. See, we're still months ahead. The U.S. was sitting out of World War II, so we didn't want to be in the war. But aggression and everything was coming up with Japan, and so, yeah. Illustration of Miller during Pearl Harbor attack. Miller woke up at 6 a.m. on December the 7th, 1941, aboard the West Virginia and served breakfast mess and was collecting laundry at 7:57 a.m. when planes from the Japanese aircraft carrier, the Akagi, fired the first 7 torpedoes that hit the West Virginia. The battle station's alarm went off, and Miller headed for his battle station, an anti-aircraft battery magazine amidships, only to discover that a torpedo had destroyed it. He then went to Times Square on deck, a central spot aboard the ship where the fore to aft and port to starboard passageways crossed. Reported himself available for other duty and was assigned to help carry wounded sailors to places of greater safety. Lieutenant Commander Dorie C. Johnson, the ship's communications officer, spotted Miller and saw his physical prowess, so he ordered him to accompany him to the conning tower on the flag bridge to assist in moving the ship's captain, Mervyn Binion, who had a gaping wound in his abdomen where he'd apparently been hit by shrapnel after the first Japanese attack. Miller and another sailor lifted the skipper but were unable to remove him from the bridge, so they carried him on a cot from his exposed position on the damaged bridge to a sheltered spot on the deck behind the conning tower, where he remained during the second Japanese attack. Captain Binion refused to leave his post, questioned his officers and men about the condition of the ship, and gave orders and instructions to crew members to defend the ship and fight. Unable to go to the deck below because of smoke and flames, he was carried up a ladder to the navigation bridge, where he died from blood loss despite the aid from a pharmacist mate. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. So yeah, Binion given the Medal of Honor. Many people said Miller deserved the Medal of Honor. He was nominated, but of course, again, he didn't get it. Lieutenant Frederick H. White had ordered Miller to help him and Ensign Victor Delano load the unmanned number 1 and number 2 Browning 50 cal anti-aircraft machine guns aft of the conning tower. Miller was not familiar with the weapon, but White and Delano instructed him on how to operate it. Delano expected Miller to feed ammunition to one gun, but his attention was diverted, and when he looked again, Miller was firing one of the guns. White then loaded ammunition into both guns and assigned Miller the starboard gun. Miller fired the gun until he ran out of ammunition, whereupon he was ordered by Lieutenant Claude B. Ricketts to help carry the captain up to the navigation bridge out of the thick, oily smoke generated by the many fires on and around the ship. Miller was officially credited with downing at least 2 hostile planes. "I think I got one of those Jap planes. They were diving pretty close to us," he said later. Japanese aircraft eventually dropped 2 armor-piercing bombs through the deck of the battleship and launched 5 18-inch torpedoes into her port side. When the attack finally lessened, Miller helped move injured sailors through oil and water to the quarterdeck, thereby unquestionably saving the lives of a number of people who might otherwise have been lost. So they say there were at least 2 here. You go back further up here, let's see, where is it? It's proclaimed by the Navy he only got 1, although Miller and others with him that day say it may have been in the range of 4 to 6. So again, question on exactly what was going on. The ship was heavily damaged by bombs, torpedoes, and resulting explosions and fires, but the crew prevented her from capsizing by counter-flooding compartments. Instead, the West Virginia sank to the harbor bottom in shallow water as her surviving crew abandoned ship, including Miller. The ship was later raised and restored for continued service in the war. The West Virginia, on the West Virginia, 132 men were killed and 52 wounded from the Japanese attack. On December 13th, Miller reported to the heavy cruiser Indianapolis. On January 1st, 1942, the Navy released a list of commendations for actions on December the 7th, and among them was a single commendation for an unnamed black man. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, had asked President Roosevelt to award the Distinguished Service Cross to the unknown black sailor. The Navy Board of Awards received a recommendation that the sailor be considered for recognition. On March the 12th, the Associated Press story named Miller as the sailor, citing the African American newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier. Additional news reports credited Lawrence D. Reddick with learning the name through correspondence with the Navy Department, and these news reports becoming influential aspects in giving the Double V campaign greater legitimacy. In the following days, Senator James M. Meade introduced a Senate bill to award Miller the Medal of Honor, and Representative John Dingell Sr. introduced a matching House bill. So yeah, these are the two people from Congress who was like, yeah, he needs a Medal of Honor. Miller was recognized as one of the first U.S. heroes of World War II. He was commended in a letter signed by Secretary of Navy Frank Knox on April 1st, and the next day, CBS Radio broadcast the episode of the series They Lived Forever, which dramatized Miller's actions. Black organizations began a campaign to honor Miller with additional recognition. On April the 4th, the Pittsburgh Courier urged readers to write the members of the Congressional Naval Affairs Committee in support of awarding the Medal of Honor to Miller. The All Southern Negro Youth Conference launched a signature campaign April 17th through 19th, and on May 10th, the National Negro Congress denounced Knox's recommendation against awarding Miller the Medal of Honor. On May the 11th, President Roosevelt approved the Navy Cross for Miller. On May the 27th, Miller was personally recognized by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, aboard the aircraft carrier Enterprise at anchor in Pearl Harbor. Nimitz presented Miller with the Navy Cross, at the time the third highest Navy award for gallantry during combat, after the Medal of Honor and the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. On August the 7th, 1942, Congress revised the order of precedence, placing the Navy Cross above the Distinguished Service Medal in precedence. Nimitz said of Miller's recommendation, "This marks the first time in this conflict that such high tribute has been made in the Pacific Fleet to a member of his race, and I'm sure that the future will see others similarly honored for brave acts." He returns to the U.S. and the war. He advanced in rating to mess attendant first class on June the 1st, 1942. And on June the 27th, the Pittsburgh Courier called for him to be allowed to return home for a war bond tour along with white war heroes. On July the 25th, the Pittsburgh Courier ran a photo of Miller with the caption, "He fought, keeps mop," next to a photo of a white survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack receiving an officer's commission. The photo caption stated that the Navy felt that Miller was too important waiting tables in the Pacific for him to return to the U.S. Wow! On November the 23rd, Miller returned to Pearl Harbor and was ordered on a war bond tour while still attached to Indianapolis. In December and January of 1943, he gave presentations in Oakland, California, in his hometown of Waco, Texas, and in Dallas, Texas, and to the first graduating class of black sailors from the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. He was featured on the 1943 Navy recruiting poster above and beyond the call of duty, the one we see here. In February of 43, mess attendant was changed to the steward's mate rate title by the Navy. On May the 15th, Miller reported to Puget Sound Navy Yard at Bremerton, Washington, and was assigned to the newly constructed escort carrier Liscum Bay. He was advanced in rating to cook third class on June the 1st. The ship had a crew of 960 men, and its primary functions were to serve as a convoy escort to provide aircraft for close air support during amphibious landing operations and to ferry aircraft to naval bases and fleet carriers at sea. The Liscum Bay was the flagship for Carrier Division 24, which was under the command of Rear Admiral Henry M. Mullenix. On October the 22nd, Liscum Bay set sail for Pearl Harbor. And then, of course, he died as part of the Battle of Macon when the ship would be torpedoed. There were 272 survivors from the crew of over 900, but Miller was among the 2/3 of the crew listed as presumed dead. His parents were informed that he was missing in action on December the 7th, 1943. Liscum Bay was the only ship lost in the Gilbert Islands operation. A memorial service was held for Miller on April the 30th, 1944 at the Second Baptist Church in Waco, Texas. Miller's decorations and awards. The Navy Cross, Purple Heart, the Combat Action Ribbon, Good Conduct Medal, American Defense Service Medal, the American Campaign Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 2 bronze stars, and the World War II Victory Medal, which was awarded posthumously, as was his Combat Action Ribbon and Purple Heart. Talked about the Naval Cross. The Doris Miller Memorial, a public art installation on the banks of the Brazos River in Waco. It is a 9-foot bronze statue that was unveiled on December the 7th, 1917. Don't know if it shows any of those. Nope. There is also a bronze commemorative plaque at the Doris Miller Park housing community near Naval Station Pearl Harbor, organized by Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority and dedicated on October the 12th, 1991, which would have been Miller's 72nd birthday. And a plaque on the memorial courtyard at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. Number of schools named after him: the Doris Miller Intermediate School in Enos, Texas; Doris Miller Elementary School, San Antonio, Texas; Doris Miller Elementary School in San Diego, California; the Dorie Miller Elementary School in Waco, Texas, unfortunately closed in 2012. And the Doris Miller Middle School in San Marcos, Texas. There are a number of community-related things dealing with Dorie Miller as well. The Bledsoe Miller Community Center recreation facility in Waco, Texas, jointly named for Jules Bledsoe and Doris Miller. The Dorie Miller Community Center recreation facility in San Antonio, Texas. The Dorie Miller Drive in Champaign, Illinois. Dorie Miller Homes, a housing community in Gary, Indiana. Dorie Miller Houses, a housing cooperative complex built in 1953 in the Corona neighborhood of Queens, New York. Dorie Miller Park in Lewisburg, West Virginia. Doris Miller Auditorium in Rosewood Park, Austin, Texas. Doris Miller Community Center in Newport News, Virginia. Doris Miller Family YMCA in Waco, Texas. Doris Miller Loop in Honolulu, Hawaii, with a monument located at the north end of the street. Doris Miller Memorial Park, a cemetery on the border of Waco and Belmead, Texas. And Dorie Miller Recreation Center, San Antonio, Texas. Military related, the USS Miller destroyer escort, reclassified as a Knox-class frigate in 1975, was commissioned as the USS Miller in 73, decommissioned in 91, bachelor enlisted quarters at the Naval Station Great Lakes was dedicated to Miller in 1971. Dorie Miller Galley, the main galley for Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. Doris Miller Dining Hall at the Naval Air Station in Chase Field in Beeville, Texas. Doris Miller Park, a housing community for military personnel in Honolulu, Hawaii. And the USS Doris Miller, a future Gerald R. Ford class aircraft carrier, was announced in 2020 and is scheduled to be laid down in 2026 and launched in 2029. Veteran related, Dorie Miller, the Disabled American Veterans Chapter in Washington. Dorie Miller Post 546, the American Legion Post in Racine, Wisconsin. Dorie Miller Post 915, American Legion Post in Chicago, Illinois. Dorie E. Miller, Post 817, American Legion Post in Beaumont, Texas. The Dorie Miller Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Waco, Texas. But yeah, a lot of things named after him for what he did. Radio, film and television. In film and television, they've got from the movie Tora, 1970. Miller is portrayed by actor Elvin Havard. Miller is portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr. in the 2001 film Pearl Harbor. Miller is being awarded the Navy Cross and was depicted in the 2019 film Midway. And Miller played by Abdul Suleiman in the National Geographic's Erased, World War II Heroes of Color, which focuses on him and fellow African-American messmates George Bland and Clark Simmons. And other stuff. So yeah. Dorie Miller. Truly a hero. Someone that should be remembered and thanked for what he contributed. But yeah, we'll go ahead and end that episode there. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. It can't just be some trash blog post or tinfoil hat wearing website. I'll be putting my links to sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.